My name is Beatrice, and at 72 years old, I never imagined I would be sharing this story with strangers. But perhaps it's time the world knew what really happened between my son, Harold, and me. You see, for years, Harold believed his mother was nothing more than a penniless old woman clinging to the remnants of a life that had passed her by. Asterisk, oh, how wrong he was. Asterisk, let me take you back to where it all began. To a time when my hands were younger, but my heart carried the same fierce determination it holds today. I was 23 when I married Harold's father, Edmund, a kind man who worked at the railway station. We weren't wealthy, but we had love, and I believed that would be enough to build a family upon. Harold came into this world on a snowy December morning in 1952. I remember holding him for the first time, his tiny fingers wrapped around mine, and promising him silently that I would move heaven and earth to give him everything I never had. Edmund and I lived in a modest two-room house on Maple Street, where the wallpaper was faded and the floorboards creaked with every step. But it was ours. When Harold was only 7 years old, tragedy struck our little family like lightning on a clear day. Edmund collapsed at the railway station during his morning shift. The doctor said it was his heart, too much strain, too much worry about providing for us. In one devastating moment, I became a widow with a young boy to raise and barely enough money to pay for Edmund's funeral. Those were the darkest days of my life. I remember sitting in our empty kitchen after Edmund's burial, looking at the few coins scattered on the table, wondering how I would feed Harold tomorrow, let alone send him to school or give him the opportunities every mother dreams of for her child. The neighbors whispered behind their curtains about the poor widow, woman who would probably end up in the poorhouse. But they underestimated Beatrice Morrison. If you're finding this story compelling so far, please consider subscribing to hear more real-life tales of triumph and resilience. I started by taking in washing from the wealthier families across town. Every morning at dawn, I would walk 3 miles to collect their soiled linens, carry them home in a heavy basket, and spend hours scrubbing them clean by hand. My knuckles bled from the harsh soap, and my back ached from bending over the washboard. But every penny I earned went toward Harold's future. When washing wasn't enough, I learned to sew. I taught myself to mend torn clothes and alter dresses by candlelight after Harold had gone to sleep. Word spread quietly among the women in town that Beatrice Morrison could make old clothes look new again. And soon I had a steady stream of customers seeking my services. But I was thinking bigger than just surviving day to day. While Harold slept, I would stay up late into the night, reading every book I could borrow from the library about business and investments. I studied the newspaper's financial section until I understood how money could work for those who were patient and strategic. With the little money I saved from washing and sewing, I began making small investments. I bought a tiny piece of land on the outskirts of town that everyone said was worthless, too far from the center, too rocky for farming. But I could see something others couldn't. Progress was coming, and the town would grow in that direction. Harold never knew about any of this. To him, I was simply his mother, who worked hard to keep food on the table and clothes on his back. I made sure he had everything he needed for school. New shoes when his old ones wore thin, and enough pocket money to feel equal to his classmates. I wanted him to focus on his education, not worry about our finances. As the years passed, my investments grew slowly but steadily. That worthless piece of land? The town expanded, and suddenly everyone wanted to build there. I sold portions of it at precisely the right moments, reinvesting the profits into other opportunities. I bought small rental properties when they were cheap, fixed them up myself, and rented them to young families starting their lives. Harold excelled in school just as I had hoped. He was bright, ambitious, and determined to make something of himself. When he graduated with honors, I felt such pride watching him walk across that stage. All those nights I had stayed awake, sewing and planning, had been worth it to see the joy on his face. He went on to college, then to a prestigious law firm in the city. He married a lovely girl named Margaret, and they built a beautiful life. Together, I was so proud of the man he had become, but I began to notice something troubling in the way he looked at me during his visits. Harold saw my simple clothes, my modest home that I had deliberately kept unchanged, and my frugal habits. He began to assume that I was struggling financially, living from one small pension check to the next. His visits became filled with subtle hints that perhaps it was time for me to consider more suitable living arrangements for someone in my situation. The truth was, by then I owned 17 rental properties, had substantial investments in various businesses, and that original piece of worthless land had made me wealthier than Harold could have imagined. But I had grown up poor, and old habits die hard. I still mended my own clothes, grew my own vegetables, and saw no need for fancy furnishings when what I had served me perfectly well. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Don't forget to follow our channel for more incredible stories of hidden strength and family revelations. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Harold's attitude toward me began to shift dramatically after his father-in-law passed away and left Margaret a substantial inheritance. Suddenly, he seemed to view me not as his mother who had sacrificed everything for his success, but as an embarrassing reminder of humble beginnings. His visits became shorter and less frequent. When he did come, he would eye my old furniture and shake his head disapprovingly. Asterisk, mother, he would say, you really must consider your future. Margaret and I have been discussing it, and we think it might be best if you looked into one of those senior communities. You know, somewhere you'd be taken care of properly. Asterisk, I knew what he really meant. He was ashamed of my modest lifestyle and wanted me tucked away somewhere he wouldn't have to explain his poor mother to his successful friends and colleagues. Asterisk, the breaking point came last spring. Harold and Margaret were hosting a dinner party for his law firm's partners, and I had asked if I could visit that weekend to see my grandson Timothy, whom I rarely got to spend time with anymore. Harold's response cut through my heart like a blade. Asterisk, mother, I'm sorry, but this weekend isn't convenient. These are very important people, and I need everything to be ... Well, perfect. You understand, don't you? Perhaps we can arrange something later when things are less complicated. Asterisk, I understood perfectly. I wasn't good enough for his important friends, the woman who had scraped together every penny to put him through school, who had gone without meals to buy his textbooks, who had worked her fingers to the bone to ensure he never felt the sting of poverty, wasn't good enough. Asterisk, that night, I made a decision that would change everything. Asterisk, I called my lawyer, a sharp young woman named Patricia who had been handling my affairs for years. Patricia, I said, it's time to make some changes to my will. Asterisk, you see, Harold had always assumed he would inherit whatever meager possessions I had. In his mind, there might be a few $1,000s, maybe the house that he could sell to, cover my funeral expenses. He had no idea that his penniless mother had built a small empire through decades of careful planning and hard work. Asterisk, I decided it was time for Harold to learn the true value of family, respect, and humility. Asterisk, the plan I devised was simple but effective. I would let Harold believe I was becoming a financial burden, and I would watch how he chose to handle the situation. Would he step up to care for the mother who had given him everything, or would he abandon her in her supposed time of need? Asterisk. Began playing the part of a struggling elderly woman. I mentioned during phone calls that my pension wasn't covering all my expenses. I talked about having to choose between heating and groceries. I even suggested that I might need to sell the house and move somewhere cheaper. Asterisk. Harold's response was exactly what I had feared but expected. Instead of offering to help, he became increasingly insistent that I sell everything and move into a state-assisted living facility. He spoke about it as if he were doing me a favor, as if warehousing his mother with strangers was an act of kindness. Asterisk, mother, you have to be practical, he would say. You can't keep living in that old house pretending you can take care of yourself. It's time to face reality. Asterisk reality. If only he knew what reality actually looked like. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss these powerful family stories that will leave you speechless. Asterisk, 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 the final. Test came when I called Harold one evening, allowing my voice to tremble with what he believed was desperation. "Harold, dear," I said, "I'm afraid I've gotten myself into a bit of trouble. The property taxes are due, and I simply don't have the money. I was wondering if perhaps you and Margaret could help me, just this once. I promise I'll pay you back. Somehow." Asterisk, the amount I mentioned was $3,000 pocket change for a successful lawyer, especially one whose wife had recently inherited a fortune. It was also a fraction of what I spent each month on charitable donations. That Harold knew nothing about. Asterisk, Harold's silence stretched so long I thought the line had gone dead. When he finally spoke, his words revealed the man he had truly become. Asterisk's mother. "This is exactly what Margaret and I have been trying to tell you. You're in over your head. You can't keep asking us to bail you out of these situations. We have our own family to think about, our own expenses. Timothy's private school alone costs more than most people make in a year." Asterisk, he paused, and I could hear him discussing something with Margaret in the background before he continued. Asterisk, look, I'll tell you what. Margaret and I will pay your property taxes this one time, but in exchange, you need to agree to put the house on the market immediately. Use whatever money you get from the sale to pay us back, and then move into Sunset Manor. It's a perfectly adequate facility. And they have payment plans for people in your ... situation. Asterisk, Sunset Manor. I knew the place well. I actually owned the building, though Harold had no way of knowing that. It was a decent facility, but it was where people went when their families had given up on them, when they had nowhere else to turn. Asterisk. "And Mother," Harold added, "this is the last time. We can't keep rescuing you from your poor financial decisions. You need to learn to live within your means." Asterisk. Poor financial decisions. From the woman who had turned pennies into prosperity while he was still learning to tie his shoes. Asterisk, I agreed to his terms, of course. I had learned everything I needed to know about the man my son had become. Harold believed that helping his mother with $3,000 less than he spent on a single suit was an unbearable burden that came with conditions and ultimatums. Asterisk, the next day. I called Patricia again. "It's time," I told her. "Execute the plan we discussed." Asterisk, 3 weeks later, Harold received a phone call that would shatter his understanding of everything he thought he knew about his mother. Asterisk, the call came from Patricia's law office. Harold was informed that due to a clerical error, there had been some confusion about property ownership in our area, and he needed to come in immediately to discuss some urgent legal matters regarding his inheritance prospects. Asterisk, confused but curious, Harold drove to Patricia's office, probably expecting to hear about some small complication with my modest estate. Instead, he found himself sitting across from a lawyer who began laying out documents that revealed the truth about his penniless mother. Asterisk, Patricia, following my instructions perfectly, began with the real estate holdings. "Mr. Morrison," she said, "I need to inform you about your mother's property portfolio. She currently owns 17 rental properties throughout the city, with a combined value of approximately $2.3 million. Asterisk, Harold's face went white. Patricia continued. Asterisk, there's also the matter of her stock portfolio, which is currently valued at $1.8 million. And her various business investments, which total another $900,000. Then there's the land development project on the east side of town. Your mother owns 40% of that venture, which is expected to yield significant returns over the next 5 years. Asterisk, by this point, Harold was gripping the arms of his chair as if the room was spinning around him. Patricia saved the best for last, asterisk, and of course there's Sunset Manor. The assisted living facility you recently recommended to your mother. She's owned that building for 12 years. The irony wasn't lost on her when you suggested she become a resident in her own facility. Asterisk Harold tried to speak several times before any words came out. This ... this can't be right. My mother doesn't have money. She asked me for help with property taxes. She's been struggling ... Asterisk. Patricia smiled. Mr. Morrison, your mother asked for help with $3,000 while sitting on assets worth over $5 million. She wasn't testing her financial situation, she was testing yours. Asterisk, the silence in that room must have been deafening. Patricia then delivered the final blow. Asterisk, your mother has decided to make some changes to her estate planning. Given your recent behavior and apparent unwillingness to support family members in what you believed was their time of need, she's decided that her fortune would be better used helping people who truly deserve assistance. Asterisk Harold learned that day that I had established a charitable foundation that would receive the bulk of my estate. The foundation would provide scholarships for children from poor families, help single mothers start businesses, and support elderly people who had been abandoned by their own children. Asterisk, as for Harold himself, I left him exactly what he had been willing to give me in my supposed time of need, the absolute minimum required by law. Asterisk, but the real lesson was still to come. Asterisk, you see, I didn't just want Harold to know that his mother was wealthy. I wanted him to understand what his choices had cost him, not just financially, but morally. Asterisk, the next phase of my plan involved Harold discovering that his law firm had just lost its biggest client. That client happened to be one of my business ventures, worth millions in annual legal fees. The partners were furious, especially when they learned that the decision to switch firms had been made by the penniless old woman that Harold had been too embarrassed to invite to his dinner party. Asterisk, but even that wasn't the end of Harold's education. Asterisk, Harold and Margaret had been living in a beautiful house that they believed they owned outright, purchased with Margaret's inheritance. What they didn't know was that Margaret's father had made some poor investments before his death, and the inheritance was largely tied up in properties that were actually losing money. They had been living beyond their means for months, using credit to maintain their lifestyle. Asterisk, when their financial situation finally collapsed. Under the weight of their overspending, Harold found himself in the exact position he had assumed I was in, struggling to pay bills, facing the possibility of losing his home, and in desperate need of family support. Asterisk, the phone call I received from Harold that evening was very different from any conversation we had shared in years. Asterisk, mother, he said, and I could hear tears in his voice. I need to talk to you. I've made terrible mistakes, and I don't know what to do. Asterisk, I listened as my son, now humbled and broken, told me about his financial troubles, his failing marriage, and his newfound understanding of what he had put me through. He apologized for his behavior, for his assumptions, and for treating me like a burden instead of the mother who had given him everything. Asterisk, I know I have no right to ask, Kay said, but I'm desperate. Margaret has left me, and I'm about to lose everything. I understand now what it feels like to need help and have nowhere to turn. I was cruel to you, mother, and I'm so sorry. Asterisk. I let him finish before I spoke. When I did, my words were measured and calm. Asterisk, Harold, I said, when you believed I needed $3,000, you made that help conditional on my giving up my independence and moving into an institution. You treated my request as a burden, and my situation as an embarrassment. Now you're asking for help that would require significantly more than $3,000 to solve. I paused, letting him absorb the parallel. The difference is, Harold, that I am your mother, and I love you despite the man you chose to become. I will help you, but not because you deserve it, because love sometimes means giving people opportunities they haven't earned. Asterisk, I helped Harold get back on his feet, but with conditions that would ensure he learned from this experience. He had to move back to our hometown, live modestly, and work with my charitable foundation to help other families facing hardship. Most importantly, he had to rebuild our relationship based on respect and genuine care, not obligation or expectation. Asterisk, it took time, but Harold eventually became the son I had always hoped he would be. He learned to value family over status, character over wealth, and compassion over convenience. He discovered that his mother's simple lifestyle wasn't a sign of poverty, but a choice, deliberate decision to live according to values, rather than appearances. Asterisk, today, Harold manages my charitable foundation with the same dedication I once put into building my business empire. He helps families in crisis, supports elderly people who have been forgotten by their children, and ensures that my money continues to serve those who need it most. Asterisk, the grandson I rarely got to see. Timothy now spends every weekend with me. Harold has taught him the story of his grandmother's journey. And Timothy looks at me with the kind of respect and admiration that can't be bought or inherited. It must be earned through character and perseverance. Asterisk, as I sit here at 72, reflecting on this long and sometimes painful journey, I realize that the greatest wealth I ever accumulated wasn't measured in dollars or properties. It was the knowledge that I had the strength to survive anything life threw at me, the wisdom to plan for the future even when the present seemed hopeless, and ultimately, the love to forgive a son who had lost his way and help him find his path back to being the man I raised him to be. Asterisk, my story isn't really about money, though money played a crucial role in teaching the lessons that needed to be learned. It's about the quiet strength that lives inside people who have faced real hardship, the dignity that comes from overcoming impossible odds, and the power that lies in never giving up on the people we love, even when they have given up on us. Asterisk, Harold thought his mother was penniless, but he was the one who had lost everything that truly mattered. Sometimes the greatest poverty isn't financial, it's spiritual, moral, and emotional. And sometimes the richest people in the world are those who have learned to value love, respect, and family above all else. Asterisk, the little boy who once wrapped his tiny fingers around mine grew up to forget the lessons I tried to teach him about kindness and gratitude. But in the end, love proved stronger than pride, and wisdom proved more valuable than wealth. Harold may have thought I was penniless, but I had something he had lost and desperately needed to find again. The understanding that true wealth lies not in what we have, but in how we treat the people who matter most. Asterisk, and that, dear friends, is a lesson worth more than all the money in the world. Asterisk.